Yeah, and thank you very much for coming and very much for this talk. To begin this really interesting set of discussions for today at the FutureFest Forward, introduction to, and I recommend going. I went last year. In fact, I guess I wore a catsuit on stage. So anyway, I come to you to talk a little bit about AI and some of the philosophies that have kind of gone into the research that have kind of informed the way that people think about and now are considering the future, what we can do with AI in the context of, in my own research, the workplace. But let's go back in time to 1955. John McCarthy, who was an assistant professor at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire, almost accidentally coined the term artificial intelligence, describing it as a basket of processes that could, as he called it, make a machine behave in ways that would be called intelligent if humans were so behaving. So the definition at its origins very closely aligned the machine with the human. So the earliest phase, therefore, of AI research, which is now nicknamed good old-fashioned artificial intelligence, or GOFI, held that human-readable representations of problems in the forms of symbols, in fact, should inform how the research would be conducted. So this form of AI involved expert systems, which reflected production rules, as they became, that are altered by then human deduction on the basis of emergent errors that are observed, in the form of symbols, as it were. So this, if this, then that type of formula, or basically a flowchart, became the types of processes that were observed. Intelligence was reasoned at the time required, according to this, as it was called, the symbolic AI approach. Makes appropriate means that there's a making of appropriate inferences from, in the case of machines, seemingly internal representations, whereby a physical symbol system was seen to posit the necessary and sufficient means for general intelligent action. So again, in aligning the machine with the human, intelligence as a concept was really reasoned and researched philosophically to understand what that could mean. So now, there was a critical discussion, of course, and debates around this, and the critics who quickly emerged with their points held that machines should actually be autonomous, and there shouldn't really be any need for human intervention. So let's reduce the role of the human. So Hubert L. Dreyfus is one of these critics of the symbolic AI, who noticed when reading the original text for this research that the ontology and the epistemologies of the work that went on in the 1960s really derived from a range of rationalist philosophical tenets. So researchers seem to anthropomorphize the machine, projecting intelligence, as I've said, onto it, thinking that the machine could automatically almost comprehend a symbol in the same way that humans do, and that robots' sensors would mimic humans' ability to process meaning from their surroundings. So Dreyfus's work then indicated that researchers had come across some obstacles or some problems that had to do with things that you might already be thinking: significance, relevance, common sense, intuition, the kinds of things that we take for granted, which robots and machines weren't automatically able to take on board. Now, these are philosophically dealt with more, as he argued, the existentialist tradition. Dreyfus argued that humans don't experience objects in the world as models of the world or symbols of the world, but humans experience the world itself. So this was the key problem with the analogy between the machine and the human, whereas robots must continuously adapt, must learn and find ways to understand and to learn about the world, to create symbols and, of course, internal representations. This problem is avoided by human beings because our model of the world is the world itself. Okay, so that's the debate as it started. Then more recently, researchers focused on making the machine and making robots more autonomous, and on, of course, machine learning. So the machine's capacity to store data in the form of memory was a very early attraction in the use of computers and machines. But now a machine has begun to make predictions, maybe even judgments, on the basis of being able to process and extract data, which is the difference, as well as to look for patterns, of course, in the case of algorithms. So these don't rely as explicitly on human intervention for making adjustments in terms of errors. So the new pattern seeking and pattern matching algorithms that we know about have led to significant breakthroughs in, for example, machinic translation of language, machine vision, for example. So, and furthermore, the training of the systems requires data and also our use of those machines. So this is a continuous process. There's a lot of data, of course, that is available now. Fortunately, we have that too. So just to give you some examples how this is being used, human profiling techniques, which were referred to a little bit by Rachel, which resource big data, are being used, for example, for credit scoring, for predictions of reoffenses in the case of criminal trials, and even employment recruitment processes and other human resource decision-making that I'll refer to in a minute, which is based on my own research. So data now can be accumulated from a range of sources, such as CCTV camera footage, data about hospital visits, Facebook likes, Twitter usage, recordings of speeches, online ads, clicks, birth records, sonar recordings, credit card transactions, phone calls, information about all of which can now be digitalized. So this can all be put into a basket, similar to the way that originally McCarthy was looking at, but in a new way that allows the machine to make potentially judgments and decisions for itself. Okay, so my own research has looked at the implications of the integration of technologies into the workplace, similar to the things I've just described, since the era of scientific management. So in my recent publications, I've outlined the history of the use of technologies to measure human labor, from that era to the current era that I talk about as being agile, the agility management system. And I look for the ways that technologies are being used to attempt to measure new areas of human labor, to understand it, such as, in fact, even affective and emotional labor. So these kinds of labor that maybe weren't seen as something that could be measurable in the past. And this has led to a reconsideration, for example, of what work can even mean. What is work? What are competences? And what can be considered at all? I've got my book here, which is The Quantified Self in Precarity, Work, Technology, and What Counts, which kind of documents quite a bit of the stuff in case anyone wants to know a bit more about that. But today, in terms of this meeting, I think what's important is to talk about a report that I've just finished, which was commissioned by the International Labour Organization, which is, of course, part of the UN. So this looks at the risks that are created when workplaces are digitalized. So what kind of risks do people face when technology is used, for example, to make human resource decisions? Or this applies also to automation, applies to electronic performance monitoring, and applies to people analytics. Today, I'll focus on people analytics and automation. But the report itself, which is about to come out, spans the arenas where this is happening, from factories to warehouses, from offices and home working spaces, from the use of algorithms in gig work to the integration of robots into factories, to the use of people analytics in offices. The argument is that automation and mechanization in factories and offices alike are putting workers at risk of heightened stress, overwork, resulting in reduction of paid working time, significant job losses, and de-skilling. So artificial intelligence is the fuel for a range of digitalized management methods. And what are those? These are, for example, the use of big data and algorithmic distribution of work. So, for example, when you take an Uber, the decision is made on the basis of the platform whereby you are in a certain location and the driver is near you. So on that basis, the decision is made how the work will happen, what work will be available for the worker, and that kind of context. Second one, use of people analytics, digitalized profiling to make decisions about hiring, firing, and performance appraisals. And of course, the use of robots and computerized processes, which in fact replace human skill and or jobs. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail for the sake of time, but what I'll do is I think what's quite interesting in terms of automation, a PricewaterhouseCoopers report shows recently 30% of UK jobs and 38% of US jobs are at risk of automation, the difference being where we may have expected routine work to be the first to be automated, we're also seeing non-routine and non-repetitive work being replaced. In this context, and for the report that I've just told you about, I did a lot of research and discussion with trade unionists. For example, IG Metall in Germany, so some of the big ones are really taking this on board to say what can be done in order to create some kinds of protections for workers. And heightened stress is one of the ones that's been reported, particularly in the context of the introduction of Industry 4.0. So a lot of new training might need to be put into place. I know that's one of the discussions for today, and what kinds of skills. I will now conclude. So human resource and management practices which involve AI have introduced the use of big data to make judgments and to eliminate what is called within people analytics the people problem. However, the ethical and moral questions that are rising now must be addressed, where the possibilities for discrimination and labor market exclusion have already been documented and are real. So people's autonomy in the context of the search for the autonomous robot and machine, people's autonomies must not be forgotten. People have specific needs or want to make choices in the context, for example, of irregular career patterns, time out for work, for reproductive and domestic labor, maternity leave, physical illness, and mental health issues. So these must be addressed, as my report argues and as this book argues, when artificial intelligence is used in workplace decision-making and work design. Thank you. And thanks for having me.